Good morning. I'm Dr. Latha, Professor, Department of Physiology in Sri Lakshmi Narayana Medical College. Today I'm going to explain about salivary secretion. Saliva is the major secretion from the salivary gland. There are three major salivary glands: parotid, submandibular or submaxillary, and sublingual. Parotid gland, it secretes 20% of the total secretion. It is the largest gland. It is located in front of the ear, and each parotid gland weighs about 20 to 30 gram. It is purely serous gland. The parotid gland, it secretes, it drains its secretion through the Stensel's duct into the mouth cavity near to the upper second molar tooth. Next, submandibular or submaxillary, which is the secretions from this gland, which includes 70% of the total secretions. This gland is located in the submaxillary triangle and it is a mixed gland. It drains its secretions through the Wharton's duct into the floor of mouth. Next one is the sublingual gland. 5% of the total saliva is secreted by the sublingual gland. It is the smallest gland. It is present beneath the tongue. It is a mixed gland. Its secretions are drains through the duct of Revenus into the floor of mouth. So in this picture, you can see the location of the three glands: parotid in front of the ear, and this one is the sublingual below the tongue, and submandibular gland. So here also shows the picture of the three glands. And the difference between these three glands are given in the table. So parotid, the weight of the gland is 20 to 30 gram, and it is purely serous gland. It secretes watery saliva, and the total percentage of secretion is 20%. Consistency, watery. And next one, submandibular gland. The weight of the submandibular gland is 8 to 10 gram, and it is a mixed gland. Serous and mucus cells present in the ratio of 4:1, and the total percentage of secretion is 70%. It is moderately viscous. It secretes moderately viscous saliva. And next one is the sublingual gland. The weight of the sublingual gland is 2 to 3 gram. It is a mixed gland. The serous cells and the mucus cell ratio is 1:4. So mucus is predominant. Mucus cells are predominant in the sublingual gland. So it secretes the viscous secretion. The total percentage of total secretion by the sublingual gland is 5%. And apart from major salivary glands, some of the minor salivary glands also present. Those are lingual mucus gland, lingual serous gland, buccal gland, labial gland, and palatal gland. Histology of the salivary gland. So if you take the salivary gland, this part is called acina part, and this one is the ductal part. Okay, so salivary gland consists of acinous and duct cells. Okay, acina cells and ductal cells. So these acina cells contain zymosin granules that secretes the enzymes, and ductal cells modify the secretion of the acina cell secretion. So this is the acinus, and this part is ductus. Innervation of the salivary gland. It has the autonomic innervation. It has both sympathetic and parasympathetic innervation. So first one, parasympathetic innervation. The submaxillary and sublingual gland, it is supplied the way the nerves to the submaxillary and sublingual glands arises from the superior salivary nucleus. The preganglionic fibers arises from the superior salivary nucleus via the facial nerve, cauda tympani branch of the facial nerve, and reaches the submandibular ganglion. From the submandibular ganglion, the postganglionic nerve fibers arise and supply to the submaxillary gland and sublingual gland. For the nerves from the parasympathetic, that means preganglionic nerve from the inferior salivary nucleus via the glossopharyngeal nerve and supply to the parotid gland. Stimulation of the parasympathetic nerve increases the watery secretion of the saliva and also causes the vasodilation. Then next one is the sympathetic innervation. The sympathetic innervation mainly originate from the upper cervical segment. That means superior cervical ganglia. Okay. The fibers arises from the nerve fibers arises from the upper cervical segment, goes to the superior cervical ganglion. Okay, from the superior cervical ganglion, postganglionic nerve fiber, it supplies to the glands, salivary glands. So stimulation of the sympathetic nerve, it causes the vasoconstriction and it decreases the salivary secretion. So in this picture, you can see the nerve supply to the salivary glands. So these two are submandibular and sublingual glands, and the above one is the parotid gland. Submandibular and sublingual gland, the preganglionic fibers arises from the superior salivary nucleus, salivatory nucleus, and via the cauda tympanic branch of the facial nerve and goes to the submandibular ganglion. So from the submandibular ganglion, postganglionic fibers arise and supplies to the submandibular and sublingual gland. From the inferior salivatory nucleus, the preganglionic fibers arise and goes via the glossopharyngeal nerve, ninth cranial nerve, and reaches the otic ganglion. From the otic ganglion, the postganglionic fibers arise and supplies to the parotid gland. So blood flow, when the blood flow increases, the rate of secretion also will increase. The blood flow to the salivary glands 10 times more than that of the skeletal muscle. Now we'll come to the composition of the saliva. The volume of the saliva is 800 to 1500 ml per day. pH is 6 to 7. Specific gravity is 1.002 to 1.012. And if you take the composition, it is mainly consists of water. 99.5% of water and 0.5% of solids. In this flow chart, you can see the solids which consist of organic constituents and inorganic constituents. So these inorganic constituents which include cations and anions. So what are the organic constituents present in the saliva? So some of the enzymes, mostly enzymes, thiolin or salivary alpha amylase, lingual lipase, mucin, kallikrein, lysozyme, lactoferrin, carbonic anhydrase, phosphatase, albumin, blood group substances, nerve growth factor, immunoglobulin A, proline-rich proteins, urea, uric acid, creatinine, xanthin, and hypoxanthin. These are the organic substances present in the saliva. And what are the inorganic substances present in the saliva? So inorganic substances which consist of anions and cations. So the anions are chloride, bicarbonate, phosphate, bromide, and halides. The chloride concentration in the saliva is 15 to 20 milliequivalent per liter, and bicarbonate concentration is 50 to 70 milliequivalent per liter. The cations present in the saliva are sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. Okay. So sodium level, the amount of the sodium present in the saliva is 15 milliequivalent per liter, and potassium is 30 milliequivalent per liter, and calcium and magnesium. Gases present are oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen. The ions vary in amount according to the flow. So next, mechanism of secretion of saliva. So there are two secretions. One is primary secretion and another one is the secondary secretion. Primary secretion is nothing but the secretion of the saliva by the acinar cells. I said in the salivary gland there are two parts. One is acinus and the ductal part. Okay. So this acinar part, it secretes the primary secretion. So acinar part contains serous cells and mucous cells. So serous cells contain zymogen granules and mucous cells contain mucus producing cells. And these zymogen granules secrete styolin and mucous cells secrete mucins, and some of the ions also secreted. Okay. So these primary secretions are isotonic to plasma. Secondary secretion. Okay, when this primary secretion passes through the duct of the salivary gland, the ionic, some of the ions are reabsorbed. So primary secretion is modified. So this modified secretion is called secondary secretion. So what are the modification is takes place? Sodium and chloride ions are reabsorbed. Potassium ions are actively secreted, and bicarbonate ions are secreted. And if you see the secondary secretion, this is hypotonic to plasma. The secondary secretion is hypotonic to plasma. So primary secretion secreted by the acinar cells, which is isotonic to plasma, and when it passes through the duct, the ionic composition is modified and become the secondary secretions. So what are the modification occurs means sodium is actively reabsorbed and potassium is actively secreted, chloride passively absorbed, and bicarbonate secreted. At rest, normally salivary secretion is isotonic to plasma. It is secreted by the acinar cells. Ductal cells modify the ionic composition. So sodium, chloride are reabsorbed, potassium and bicarbonate are secreted. So when the flow rate is more, at rapid flow rate, saliva become less hypotonic. So the secondary section, normally the secondary secretion is hypotonic to saliva. So when it passes through at the rapid flow, the saliva becomes less hypotonic because there is no time for the reabsorption of sodium and chloride as well as secretion of potassium ion. So sodium and chloride concentration increases and potassium concentration decreases in the saliva when it is secreted at the rapid rate. So aldosterone decreases the salivary sodium and chloride ion concentration because aldosterone, it reabsorbs the sodium ions and secretes the potassium ion, so that aldosterone decreases the sodium ion concentration and increases the potassium ion concentration. So next one is the regulation of salivary secretion. There are two regulations, neural regulation and reflex regulation. So neural regulation, as we discussed earlier, it is mainly by way of parasympathetic and sympathetic nerves. Parasympathetic nerves, nerve endings releases the vasoactive intestinal peptide, acetylcholine and bradykinin, which increases the watery saliva and also it causes the vasodilation. The parasympathetic system, it causes vasoconstriction and decreases the salivary secretion. Next one is the reflex regulation. There are two types of reflex: unconditioned reflex and conditioned reflex. Unconditioned reflex usually develops at birth itself. It does not require any previous experience. The stimulus for the unconditioned reflex is presence of food in the mouth. So that is unconditioned reflex, and conditioned reflex normally it is acquired by the previous experience. So it needs previous experience. Sight or thought of smell, taste of any delicious food that causes secretion of the saliva, increased secretion of the saliva. That is conditioned reflex. Unconditioned means automatically it will come. It is present from birth, and conditioned is once you tasted, after that the salivary secretion increases when you see the same food in the next time. So next one is the paralytic secretion. Denervation of the parasympathetic supply in the experimental animal increases the salivary secretion. So when you denervate the parasympathetic nerve, first it increases the salivary secretion. After that, it diminishes, the salivary secretion diminishes and finally stops at about 6th week. So this is due to release of adrenaline from the adrenal gland. Augmented secretion, increased secretion following repeated stimulation of parasympathetic nerve or combined stimulation of parasympathetic and sympathetic nerves. That increases the secretion of the saliva. Repeated stimulation of the parasympathetic nerve or combined stimulation of parasympathetic and sympathetic nerve increases the salivary secretion. That is called augmented secretion. So next part is functions of saliva. So saliva contains salivary enzymes. So that has different function, digestive function, then a lubricating function. Okay, so many functions. First constituent alpha amylase or thiolin. So thiolin, it helps in the carbohydrate digestion. It hydrolyzes the starch. So it is active when the pH more than 4. When the pH becomes less than 4, it is inactivated. So it acts on the carbohydrate, it acts on the starch and convert that into glucose. Mucin, it lubricates the food, assists mastication and facilitate the deglutition, aids speech and protects the oral mucosa by neutralizing acid. So alpha amylase in that the alpha amylase act on the starch and convert that into maltose, not glucose, maltose. And next one is the lingual lipase. The lingual lipase digests the fat. It involves in the fat digestion. And lysozymes, it is a bactericidal. It kills the bacteria. Immunoglobulin A, it confers the local immunity. Lactoferrin, it binds with iron and arrests the bacterial multiplication and prevents the dental caries. So it acts as a bacteriostatic. And saliva keeps the mouth moist and it acts as a solvent for the molecule that stimulates the taste buds. It acts as a vehicle for excretion of heavy metals, viruses and drugs. And proline-rich proteins present in the saliva, it binds with toxic tannins and maintains the oral pH. So at pH 7, saliva is saturated with calcium so that do not lose the calcium in the oral fluid and protects the tooth enamel. Nerve growth factor, it is present in the saliva, helps in the growth of sympathetic ganglia. It also helps in the regulation of the temperature. It is well developed in animal by the panting mechanism. It maintains the oral hygiene. Saliva helps to maintain the oral hygiene. So basal secretion washes away the bacteria and food particles. Digestion of the food which forms the nutrition to the bacteria. So basal secretion washes away the bacteria and food particles. Lysozymes attacks bacteria and helps in the entry of thiocyanate ion into the bacteria. Lactoferrin, it acts as a bacteriostatic, and secretory antibodies IgA, secretory antibodies or IgA, that helps in the immune mechanism. Proline-rich proteins protects the tooth enamel. Applied aspect, hyposalivation, decreased secretion of the saliva. It is mainly seen in mouth breathers, Bell's palsy, cyalolithiasis. Xerostomia or atrialism, decreased salivary secretion. The causes are congenital aplasia, hypoplasia of salivary gland, destruction of acini by the means of irradiation, surgical ablations, and tumor. Cyalolithiasis means calculi in the salivary duct. Transient hyposalivation seen in fear, anxiety, fever, dehydration, parasympatholytic drugs such as atropine and drugs like barbiturates, antihistamine. Okay, that causes the transient hyposalivation. Hypersalivation or thialism or cyalorrhea, increased secretion of the saliva, seen in cancer, decayed tooth, ill-fitting dentures, disease of esophagus, stomach and intestine. It also seen in cerebral palsy, Parkinsonism, and drugs like iodine and mercury. Sjogren's syndrome. It is an autoimmune syndrome in which immune cells destroy the salivary and lacrimal glands. So the main symptom is dryness of mouth with dryness of eyes. Carda tympani syndrome, sweating while eating. During regeneration, the facial nerve may deviate and join with the nerve fiber supplying the sweat gland. Drooling, uncontrolled flow of saliva outside the mouth is called drooling. The causes are during teeth eruption, upper respiratory tract infection, tonsillitis, difficulty in swallowing. Mumps, painful swelling of parotid gland. Thank you.